Hello everybody, my name is Hope E. Wilson and I'm going to do a quick presentation today on the social and emotional needs of gifted students. This is a presentation I put together for James Weldon Johnson College Preparatory Middle School in Duval County. So first off, a little bit about me. I'm a professor in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Curriculum at the University of North Florida. I've written over 30 articles in journals such as Gifted Child Quarterly, the Journal of Advanced Academics, and the Journal for Educational Research. I've published over 15 book chapters in gifted education textbooks, and I'm the author of 2 different books, Letting Go of Perfect, Empowering Children to Overcome Perfectionism with my co-author Jill Adelson, and Building Transformational Kindness in Schools, a guide for teachers and school leaders, and that will be out this December, and they're both published by Routledge Press and available on Amazon. So I want us to think a little bit about ourselves. How many of us have, I know we're all middle school parents, but how many of us also have preschoolers at home or elementary school students? Of course, we have middle schoolers. What about high school parents or even parents of college students? How many of our students have an EP? Not all of us have kids who are formally identified as gifted in the state of Florida, but we'll talk a little bit about how that definition is fairly limiting. But some of us also have kids who have IEPs or 504s, so kids with additional needs. And as we talk today about kind of the social and emotional needs of gifted kids, I want this to be a judgment-free zone. When we had babies and infants at home, when our kids cried, even if it was in the middle of a really quiet meeting, there wasn't any judgment. It was like, oh, let's all come together as a community and help take care of these babies. And as our kids get older, I feel like there's more judgment on parents. Why is your kid acting that way? Or are they misbehaving? Why are they rolling your eyes at you? Can't you just be a better parent? And I think that I want this place and this space to be a really judgment-free zone as parenting. Parenting is hard. It is hard work, guys, and we're all doing the best we can. And every kid is different. So this is going to be a place where we can share our stories without judging each other. So when we first talk about what is academic talent, what is giftedness, what does that mean? I think of it in 2 different ways. The first way is a potential to think at a greater capacity. Faster, deeper, more creatively, and generally we measure this with an IQ score, although know that the IQ score is an imperfect measure of that capacity. It's a flawed measure in a lot of ways, right? It's written by people. We can't, use an MRI machine to, take out a ruler and measure our ability to think, so it has flaws. Or a demonstration of that capacity. So if a student who is a high achiever, if you're making all A's in your honors classes, then you're gifted, right? You couldn't do that without having that capacity. Unfortunately, in Florida, we don't identify based upon achievement. However, I'm going to say that if your kid's at James Weldon doing well, then they've demonstrated that capacity. They've demonstrated that achievement level, and that might be on test scores like the FSAs or their grades in school, but it could also be their projects or things that they do outside of school. So there's a lot of different ways in which we might demonstrate giftedness. So I want to start off by just stating that when we think about academically talented kids and emotions, we don't see a greater incidence of health issues. That's been proven over and over again. More allergies, I've heard that one before, gut issues. The really gifted kids don't have more of those things. There's also not more psychiatric disorders like anxiety or depression. There's not a greater incidence of ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, despite movies like Rain Man or Big Bang Theory. There's not a greater incidence of suicide or depression or social maladaptation or sensitivities. But all of these things may manifest a little bit differently at times, and our environments may contribute to these disorders. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first one I want to talk about is ADHD and that hyperactivity and attentiveness. Some people will say that you can't be gifted to have ADHD. If a kid's kind of inattentive or distributing those characteristics, they're probably just bored in class, and that's what if a gifted kid has those symptoms, they're probably just bored. And in fact, what we see is that, the rate of ADHD and among the gifted population is about the same as it is in the typical population. In fact, it happens, right? That you can have both. But what does it look like? It's a kid who's maybe easily distracted more than their peers. Or who can have a hyper focus. So if they have trouble transitioning between things, they might spend a lot of time on one thing. And I think that's something that we don't recognize as a symptom of ADHD sometimes, right? But be like, well, my kid can sit there and work on their comic books and draw for a really, really long time. They don't have ADHD. And in fact, that might be a symptom of their ADHD. Difficulty with organization. ADHD is primarily a disorder of executive functioning. They also can be really forgetful. Both my kids are diagnosed with ADHD, and it drives me crazy how much they forget their things or I'll be like, did your teacher mention that? And they'll be like, I don't know. Or I'll tell them something and they'll be like, wait, what did you just say? I mean, it's that kind of constant kind of forgetfulness. And again, sometimes these characteristics might be just intelligence, right? Like they were just thinking about something else. They were off in their own little world, thinking about quantum mechanics or whatnot, right? But when it interferes with their daily functioning, when it interferes with their ability to be successful, that's when we get worried. And so when I see a kid who's not successful in school because of their disorganization, because they're turning in work in late, because they're not doing their assignments, I don't want to jump to, oh, they're lazy or, oh, they're bored in class. I want to get the ADHD checked out first. So it's worth it to you to go to a school psychologist to check and see if they have ADHD before you jump to, oh, they're just lazy or, oh, they're just bored. Because if we can do an intervention for their ADHD, that'll improve their performance in school, and then we're not like blaming them for something that they really don't have control over. So I recommend it. I mean, I didn't get my daughter diagnosed with ADHD until she was a junior in high school, and all through middle school she really struggled, and I just didn't know why. And this would have been better, right? But she was able to kind of compensate because she is really bright, she is really smart, but it was there the whole time. And I also want to kind of point out that ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and but there's really three different types. There's a hyperactive type, and that's the kind we think about, right? Where they're kind of bouncing off the walls, they're always jiggly, they're doing stuff, right? And we're fairly good at recognizing that type, right? And then there's the inattentive type, and that's the kid who just kind of is spacey, is maybe not paying attention, but also not distracting others, just kind of the hyperactivity type comes with that impulsivity, that, not blurting out answers, saying the first thing that comes to their mind. The inattentive type doesn't necessarily do that. They just aren't really paying attention. And so sometimes it's more difficult for us to identify those inattentive types, especially if it doesn't come with a hyperactivity. And then, of course, there's the kids that have both inattentive and hyperactive type. So again, I just recommend that you identify it. The next thing we're going to talk about is academically talented kids and anxiety, and certainly you can be both academically talented and have anxiety, and we see this in our population, right? So anxiety is characterized by excessive worry. It can be accompanied by physical symptoms: headaches, nausea, upset tummies, tension headaches in particular. In fact, I have anxiety, and I actually gave myself a sore throat. So like any number of kind of physical manifestations from this tension in our bodies. Depression and sadness can also accompany that anxiety. They're comorbid. Changes in mood. So again, anger, and sadness both come along with anxiety. We also see weight loss or weight gain, changes in weight, and changes in sleep patterns, either sleeping more or sleeping less, difficulty falling asleep. And all of these can be concerning as a parent. And what I want to say is that while intelligence itself doesn't necessarily cause anxiety, the environmental pressures we put gifted kids in might cause us to see greater levels of anxiety among our gifted population. So when we put them in a high pressure situation, we put them in all honors classes, we expect them to do lots of activities, then we might see an increase in anxiety because of the things we're asking them to do. So that's my caveat here, is that I think that we are in a mental health crisis in our country. We know that. We know we're seeing more anxiety in kids, and I think we're seeing an increase in anxiety among our academically talented kids, not necessarily because it has something to do innately with them, but because we've also seen this increase in our requirements for AP, for IB classes, for the pressure we put on kids. So that anxiety might be coming from the environment that we have kids in. The next one is the gifted kids and depression, which is, of course, sadness, changes in mood. Sometimes depression manifests itself in anger. So I'm going to keep that in mind for kids in particular. It can also be kind of not just sadness, but kind of a lack of interest, a disinterest in things that used to interest them. Changes in appetite. Sometimes with gifted kids, it can also be like an existential crisis, like just questioning the world that can lead to a depression in ways that we might not see in typically developing kids. This idea of like, I remember when my child was very little, she looked at me and she was like, "Mom, I'm just really, really sad about all the turtles, just the turtles that die." When do you do that with a 3-year-old, right? Like, I mean, you know, we can't, 3-year-old can't save turtles, right? But so it's kind of those awareness of the bigger issues in life, and especially when our kids aren't necessarily emotionally ready to deal with those big issues, but they can kind of intellectually understand them. And of course, any kind of suicidal ideation can come along with depression. And a lot of times it's depression and anxiety, again, are really comorbid. They often accompany each other. And what I want to say here is that that both of these issues, sometimes we just chalk it up to, well, our kid's gifted, and that's, you know, they're moody, and that kind of happens. And as a parent who has kids who've struggled with this, it's really important that we don't just say, oh, well, they're just gifted. We want to seek mental health services if you suspect your child's going through any kind of crisis, or you just think that they are struggling with mood. Most children can benefit from therapy, and if you think that there's a need for immediate services, they have bridge services and immediate services available for children who are experiencing an emergent need. So I know, like, if you just call and you're like, well, I need a therapist, there could be a long wait list, but if you need something emergent, there are services available. And also there's a crisis team at the school and mental health services available through the school that can also, they can help you, put you in touch with a crisis center as well. So I just want you to be encouraged to seek that out if you even have an inkling, and also any kind of self-harm or any kind of discussion or mention of that is a need for a referral. Again, mental health counselors can help you and your family kind of determine how real that threat is, but it's not something that you need to decide for yourself. And I think it's easy as parents to want to think the best and to want to kind of just be like, oh, well, it's probably not a problem. But I encourage you to take it seriously, because it can be really serious, and it's hard to admit that as a parent. But let's talk a little bit, kind of switching gears a little bit, and let's talk about academically talented kids and their social interactions, because I think that's something that across the board we as parents kind of worry about, like, how does this kid make friends, right? And I think we always a lot of our kids can be kind of awkward and weird, right? So what do we do with that? And the first kind of issue with that is asynchrony, right? So when our kids are young and they're gifted, they perhaps have advanced vocabulary. And, you know, if I'm a 3-year-old who has all these big words that none of my friends understand, I could have trouble making friends, right? And if I don't have that peer group early on, it can be difficult for me to develop those social skills because I don't have other people, other friends, to start developing those early social skills and those early verbal skills. I also, and as I grow up as a child, I might have really different interests than the other kids in my class, right? I remember my youngest would always say, "God, Mom, I'm so tired of those soccer kids. I'm not a soccer kid." And really what she was expressing was this idea that she just really had different interests than the other elementary school kids in her class. And how do I help her manage those ideas? How do I help her manage that social landscape of just having different interests? And that's where being at a school like James Weldon, being in a magnet school, or being a part of a GATE program, a gifted program, can help kids, because they can find kids with similar intellectual capabilities as themselves and find that peer group, find those other kids who might share interests with them. And that's really important for that social development, finding that peer group. But at the same time, our gifted kids also have an advantage that other kids don't in their intellectual abilities. They are able to reason. They are able to figure out how to make friends in more capabilities. We also see that that as our kids get older, they're able to develop social skills at a greater rate. They're able to reason and think at a greater capacity, and they're able to make friends better in a lot of ways. So when we look across an averages, we look at gifted kids in high school and in middle school, we don't necessarily see that gifted kids as a whole have difficulty making friends, although certainly that is true for some proportion of gifted kids. And I think the key to those social interactions is really helping them develop those peer groups, helping them find those groups of kids. I also get questions about, like, well, should they interact with non-gifted peers or not? And I think it's healthy to have a balance. I think it's healthy to make sure that they have time to interact with intellectual peers, for them to be in honors classes, for them to be in gifted classes, to be in chess club or robotics club, or those interest groups, but then also to be in sports teams, or to be in scouts, or to be around to be among kids that aren't necessarily their intellectual peers, and to have those interactions as well. And then let's talk a little bit about twice exceptionality. So twice exceptionality is the idea that you're gifted and you also have some sort of other exceptionality, whether it's autism, ADHD, a learning disability like dyslexia, or physical impairment. And there can really be 4 outcomes here. The first one is that you're identified with your exceptionality and you're never identified as gifted, and you're kind of stuck in that special education box for your life, and you never really get to reach your full potential. The other outcome might be that you are identified as gifted and your exceptionality is never really discovered, and that's kind of what happened to my firstborn. She was identified gifted all the way through, and it wasn't until her junior year of high school that we really recognized how much she was struggling with ADHD and how that was really limiting her successes. And then we have the kids who are kind of just in regular classes, and they're never really identified either way, that their giftedness is helping them compensate for their special needs, and they're never really getting the services they need to overcome their exceptionalities, and they're never really getting the services they need to really expand their intellectual needs as well. And then the ideal circumstances is if we can identify both their exceptionality and their giftedness and give them services for both. And I think that it's really easy for a gifted kid to develop compensation skills and help them kind of overcome their exceptionalities, and that's a good thing. That's what we want them to do, but it can also be detrimental when we don't recognize and we're not able to offer the support that they can and that they need. And this can also happen with anxiety and depression. We want to make sure that we're also not using giftedness as an excuse to not give them the services they need for those disorders as well. So it's really important that we identify kids for this. And sometimes our schools, if our kid isn't failing, if they're not if they're still, getting 3s on the FSAs, if they're still kind of passing their classes, a lot of times the schools aren't necessarily jumping at the bit to get them the services they need, because they're expensive. But know that the federal law protects kids, protects our gifted kids, and mandates that we provide services for kids through the 504, regardless of their IQ, regardless of their abilities. So if a kid has ADHD or dyslexia or any other kind of need, the school still must provide services even if they are not failing their classes. So if you ever need support for that, let me know. I'm certainly willing to help you with that, but know that sometimes our school psychologists and our professionals aren't always as aware of the needs of gifted, because they have big jobs. They have lots of students, and so sometimes it just takes a parent to help them be aware of it. And so some of the needs that are commonly manifested for academically advanced kids, sometimes the things that we often see are underachievement. So this idea that our kids don't achieve to their full potential, and that could be due to twice exceptionality. It could be due to not feeling like they can be successful in a given environment. It could be due to a lack of motivation, and just not understanding why school might be important, and so helping them realize the utility value of school. We see perfectionism in kids. I see some nods around the room. Perfection is certainly an issue for a lot of our kids, and in that case, we just want to make sure that we can help them not be concerned with the outcome, but be concerned with that learning process, and help them identify ways in which they can have healthy goals and not strive for absolute perfection. Perfectionism can also lead to underachievement. So I might not try if I think I'm going to make a mistake, or if I don't think I'm going to be successful. A multi-potentiality is this idea that I'm good at lots of things, and so I might end up in a situation where I'm trying to do too many things because I feel like I might have an obligation to be good at kind of everything. And then there's lots of stress and anxiety about the future, especially middle school, such a time of transition. So how do I make a decision about where I'm going to go to high school, or who I am as a person? So some strategies for parents. My first strategy is to de-emphasize grades, to focus on that learning, especially middle school. Really focus on that learning that's happening, and it's less important what grades a kid gets, especially in middle school, because unless they're in algebra, geometry, or a high school level class, their grades aren't going to matter for a college. So this is the time for them to really to de-emphasize those grades. Developing that whole child, thinking about their physical health, their social health, their mental health, and all of those things are, I would even argue, more important than their grades and their academics. And it's easy to get caught up in the academics, especially when you're at a school like James Weldon. But I think it's so much more important that we look at that whole child, and we look at all of those aspects of what makes a good human being. Limiting the activities. It's so tempting to want your child to do everything, but really thinking about what's most important. And when I say activities, I also say school schedule. Thinking about how many honors classes are important for your kid to be healthy and happy. Monitoring sleep and nutrition, making sure that your child's eating healthy and getting enough sleep. We oftentimes sacrifice sleep for academics, and it's really detrimental for so many reasons. Encouraging healthy friendships, helping your child identify who's a good friend and who's not, and knowing when your kid's in a healthy place. Choosing their environments wisely, and not being afraid that if you choose a school, the environment that is detrimental to your child's mental health, that it's okay to switch, it's okay to move, and it's okay to not choose a school that every other parent's choosing for their child, because you know your child the best. You know what's going to be the best choice for your kid, and what's going to be too stressful or cause detriments to their mental health. And being supportive of your kid, loving them, and letting them know how much you care and love and support them is so important. And that gradual release of responsibility. So it's tempting as a parent to be really controlling, to make the choices for them, to take away their phone or to limit all of these things, but really slowly but surely allowing them to be part of that process so that by the time they're a senior in high school, they're taking ownership of all of that, so that when they go off to college, they have that autonomy that they can make those decisions themselves. So my closing thoughts are to concentrate on what's right for your child right now and not focusing on the future. I hear so many parents that will talk about, well, I have to get to this elementary school so they can get into this middle school, so they can get into this high school, so they can go to the right college. And what I want to say is all of that's important, but what's really, really important is thinking about my little kindergartner. What's the best kindergarten environment for my child? What's the best 9th grade environment for my 8th grader? What's the best 6th grade environment for my 5th grader? Concentrate on those things first. We're all going to struggle with parenting. It's hard. And don't be afraid to talk about those issues with your friends, with your parent friends. Middle school parenting is tough, and I would not have made it without my James Weldon Johnson middle school mom friends. So reach out to each other. You're your greatest resource. And if nothing else, the best and most important thing we can teach our children is kindness towards each other. So just reach out. I always tell my kids, you're smart and you're beautiful and you're kind, but the only one that I really, really care about is that you're kind, because, you were born smart and you were born beautiful, but you get to choose to be kind. And that's what I want my kids to lead the world in, is kindness. So finally, I'm available for questions, and usually when I leave a presentation, I don't have any questions then, but then on the drive home I think of some. So please feel free to email me later with your questions, and I so look forward to speaking with you. Bye.